In this lesson, we're going to finish working on the skin for our Caucasian female by adding in some final details, such as veins and freckles. So let's go ahead and jump back in. So at this point, I think we're really happy with the way our skin has turned out. So let's just go ahead and recap a few things. Human skin, there's a lot of variation in skin, especially with colors. As I mentioned in the very beginning of this course, that often a mistake that we can make is we'll take one skin tone, one color, and just use different variations of the different values of that color when painting our skin, and that can often result in something that feels very flat, very lifeless. So just looking at our face here, we've got a lot of different color variations, a lot of different skin tones. We've got some warm colors, some reds, some oranges, and some yellows throughout. Skin is also very reflective and translucent, so it's absorbing some of the environment around it. In this case, we've got a lot of green, and we see that reflected here in the skin in some areas. Now with our highlights, we didn't just use white, which again is sometimes a mistake that some people make when adding highlights to flesh. Is if you use just white, it's going to kind of give this porcelain, plasticky effect. And so to further illustrate what I'm talking about, let's go ahead and just hide the visibility of our background. And if we look at the highlights on the skin, just against our white default canvas, we can see that we didn't just use white. There's a lot of blues, a lot of greens, even some yellows and pinks in there. So we can just kind of see that in these different areas. And we also didn't blow out our highlights too intensely. We definitely reined them in. That's sometimes a problem we run into, is if we get our highlights too intense, too overpowering, it just adds to that kind of porcelain, or not porcelain, but really plastic appearance of the skin. So let's go ahead and turn on the visibility of our background. And finally, just speaking about highlights, we have kind of a peak highlight here on the tip of the nose, kind of on the lips and over the lips as well. We're very mindful of adding those peak highlights in. Sometimes adding too many all over the face can make your subject feel very oily or plasticky once again. So we're at a point where we want to take the illusion of the skin feeling reflective and translucent and just take it a little bit further. And we're going to do that by adding some veins in. So with that said, let's go over here to our layers panel. You can see I've made a couple of new layers, one titled veins and one titled freckles. We'll go ahead and start with the veins. We're going to kind of work them into the head here. Now if you've ever looked at a person that's bald, if you look closely enough, you can see a lot of veins in their head. Again, veins, we do have a lot of greens and blues in our skin tone because of veins in our skin, underneath our skin rather. So I've kind of grabbed just a blue color, and we'll start working in painting in these veins. Now before we begin painting, let's go over here to our brush panel, and you'll notice I've got my brush tip set to transfer and shape dynamics. This way I can just kind of have a little bit of variation with the shape of the veins as well as the opacity. So as we paint these veins, we're going to be thinking about how we can set them into the skin. And we're going to do this by playing around with some blend modes and the opacity. We might use a filter as well, just to kind of set them in. We don't want the veins to be the focal point. We don't want them to be the first thing that we see when we look at this female here. But we just want them to be very subtle. We want them to feel like they're right underneath the skin. And that just kind of adds to that translucent effect that the skin has. The skin, again, as I've said many times, it's very reflective, very translucent. It pulls in light, bounces it around underneath that layer of the skin, and sends it back out. Kind of scatters it around. So I'm trying to keep these veins pretty random. If you want an idea of kind of how the veins lay across the head, you could maybe look up some different images online, grab a medical book. I'm not too worried about these veins being perfectly accurate according to like a medical book or anything like that, because we're not really going to see them in their entirety. We just want to see parts of them. So I'm just kind of trying to imagine how they might kind of roll across the top of the head here. Just kind of imagining how they might naturally flow. I don't want them to feel too rigid or too uniform in nature. And just kind of thickening up certain areas here and there. So that feels pretty good. Let's jump over here to the screen right. I'm going to kind of mimic that squiggly vein that we have going on the screen left. Very cool. And let's bring over kind of another long vein, kind of fading it out. Just kind of continuing on with that vein right there. And we'll kind of add one last little vein up here at the top. Alrighty, so let's go ahead and zoom out and see how crazy that looks. She looks like a alien or a mad scientist or something, so obviously we don't want the veins to look like that. So the first thing we can do is let's just take down the opacity way down. We'll see what 50% looks like. Maybe even a little bit further, maybe around 40%. All right, so that still looks a little bit wild, a little too crazy, a little too intense. If I were to look at this for the first time, that'd be the first thing I'd look at. We don't want that to, again, be the focal point. So now let's explore how we can kind of set these veins into the flesh a little bit further. So I'm going to just go up here to the very top, and we're going to click on Filter, and we're going to go down to Blur, and then go to Gaussian Blur. And here in our dialog box for our Gaussian Blur, we're just going to kind of play around with this slider down here at the bottom. Just kind of blur these veins a little bit, just kind of blurring them, not having them so crisp and defined and sharp. Just going to allow them to set into the skin. It kind of gives that illusion that they're just right under that top layer of the skin. So that feels pretty nice. May just go a little bit further. Very good. Let's go with that. So just zoom out, kind of zooming in and out. Very cool. Let's go ahead and hide the visibility of this layer. Just make a quick comparison. And I think that just adds to the overall translucent effect of the skin. So let's go ahead and add some freckles in. We got that layer right above, which I've titled Freckles. We'll go ahead and just work some freckles into the skin. Now, there are a lot of different ways you could add freckles in. You could make your own brush. You could adjust the tip of your brush to just scatter a bunch of freckles. I'm not going to put a whole lot of freckles, just a few. So I'm not going to really mess around with adjusting the tip of my brush or changing the shape of it or anything like that. I just want to kind of add a few here and there. And I want to just have a little bit more control over where they're placed. So I'm just kind of going around dabbing them in. Now they're not all going to look that intense, just like we did with the veins. We want them to set into the skin. And so we'll adjust the opacity of these freckles. Just kind of going around, kind of varying up the sizes of the freckles. And I just kind of grabbed a dark color. Freckles usually kind of have a brownish appearance. I may want to grab a lighter color as well. I probably won't put too many of these light little dots. This kind of will complement the skin, kind of give that illusion that there's some pores in there. I'm not worried about there being a whole lot of these. I don't want her skin to feel overly porous. I think that might take away from all of the work we did blending in these different skin tones. We just want it to kind of complement what we've done. May want to grab another dark color. May want to have a couple just up here in the forehead. Just very lightly. May want to have some down here on the neck as well. Okay, good. Let's go ahead and zoom out. And we'll go ahead and take the opacity of our freckles. Let's just take them way down. And we could even play around with some blend modes as well, if we want to try to help set them into the skin. Maybe bring our opacity up just a little. Just kind of adjusting the opacity. Let's try soft light one more time. Just trying to get a feel of how these freckles set into the skin. Very cool. Alrighty, so these are just a few little additional details that we've added into our skin. Now, just looking at everything as a whole, I think there's one final thing that we could do just to unify everything that we've done up to this point. As I mentioned very early on in that first lesson, the background, the environment is something you want to consider when painting any kind of subject, especially skin, because a lot of the environment is going to be pulled into the skin. It's going to be reflected. So let's go ahead and make one additional layer here in our skin detail group. And I'm going to go down here to my background layer, and let's just kind of turn that on and off real quick. Just kind of making a quick comparison. And I'm trying to get an idea of where I'd like to sample from this background. I want to pull in just some more of that green into the skin. I want to be very subtle about this, but this is just going to kind of tie everything together. That final little touch. So let's go ahead, and I'm just going to hit Alt. I'm just going to sample kind of around here, around the edge, kind of this lighter value of that green. And I'm going to go up here to this new layer, and let's go ahead and get our paint bucket tool, making sure that the opacity is set to 100. Let's just fill in that layer. Now obviously that's covering up everything, so I'm going to grab my layer mask from one of these layers below, holding down Alt. I'll bring that over, drag that over our new layer. And now that green has been confined to our female subject here, our head. Now obviously we don't want it to look like that, so let's go ahead and play around with some different blend modes to set this in just a little bit. And I'm thinking just right off the bat that soft light might do the trick. Let's go ahead and see what overlay looks like. Hard light. I think soft light's going to be the one to go with. Now that still looks a little bit overly saturated. So let's go ahead and take our opacity down, way down. I'm thinking 20, 30%. 26, 25% I think is going to work. Okay, let's go ahead and just uncheck the visibility of this layer really quick. And it's just a very subtle addition. Just pulling some more of that environment into everything we've already done. It just kind of ties it all together. Just one final little touch that you can try. And I like how that looks. So there we have it. There we have our skin that we've painted for our Caucasian female. Again, we've got a lot of different variations. The skin is translucent, it's reflective, it's got a lot of different colors. So I hope you found this course useful and are able to take elements of it when painting skin for your own project. One thing to keep in mind that this was just one approach, and this is because everyone's skin is different. No matter what ethnicity or what nationality you are, everyone has a different skin type. So keep that in mind, and we'll see you next time in another course.